Baghdad, Iraq. Site of so many conflicts in recent years. Dictators, foreign invasion, civil war. The scars of history run deep on this landscape. With a population of some 8 million people, it's the fourth largest in the Middle East. Yet, this isn't the first great city to dominate the southern Mesopotamian plains. Not by a long shot. Heading out into the scorched deserts to the southeast of the city, it doesn't take long until great earthen mounds line up on the horizon. For this is a land of tells. Vast man-made hills built up from the refuse of thousands of years of occupation. Still standing guard over the country they once ruled.
Yo, Cédric, comment ça va, mon ami?
Now desolate, remote.
J'espère que tout va bien avec vous. Je suis bien, merci, et vous?
Baghdad and the Persian Gulf,
J'espère que tout va bien
just to the
aussi.
southwest,
Très
the
bien,
town of
très
Nazareth
bien.
stands one of
Excellent.
the greatest of all those mounds.
Heureux que tu es ici.
Once, long ago, the wide banks of the Euphrates passed by here, though little evidence of that can be seen now. The great life-giving river having forsaken the place more than 2,000 years before, leaving just rubble
Depuis que je
dirt
te
and
suis,
bones.
je n'ai pas compris.
And that's how it remained for more than 2,000 years. Wind and time burying the place entirely.
Oh, très bien, très bien. Oh, quel jeu? Oh, très bien, wow.
By the
Pour jouer avec
mid-19th
votre
century,
fils,
however,
oui,
strange
certainement,
artifacts
j'imagine.
began to show up in nearby markets. A great revolution in archaeology was taking place at the time. And due to the painstaking efforts of an entirely new branch of scholarship, Assyriology, the ancient script on many of the items, cuneiform, was deciphered, allowing an unprecedented glimpse into that world before, so long ago. And what the scholars read of that great mound by Nazareth completely boggled the mind. Its name was and it had been mentioned in the Bible as the very place where Abraham, progenitor of 3 of the great world religions, had been born. Before heading forth with his wife and children to wander the world after the city's demise. At the time, the fledgling field of archaeology mostly concerned itself with collecting tablets and artifacts from ancient sites for further investigation elsewhere. But by 1920, new, more vigorous scientific styles were favoured. And for the first time, a comprehensive investigation of the city itself would be attempted. The man to lead that mission was Leonard Woolley. He'd worked under the pioneering discoverer of Minoan Crete, Sir Arthur Evans, and more recently numbered the famous Lawrence of Arabia in his team. Accompanying Woolley went Max Malawan and his soon-to-be wife Agatha Christie, who'd later write a book inspired by the journey. The world was watching. It was to be one of the most famous of all archaeological expeditions, unearthing some of the greatest treasures ever found in the ancient world, matching that of Tutankhamun's tomb. Almost immediately, Woolley confirmed the city to be Ur, a major centre of the Sumerian culture of the early Bronze Age. Excavations would continue for another 14 years, revealing continuous occupation of the site from around 5000 to 500 BC. At its height, the city had been home to approximately 65,000 people, one of the greatest the world had ever seen. Though European work in the Middle East had begun as an effort to find the origins of the Hebrew Bible, it ultimately revealed so much more. Revolutionizing our understanding of the Sumerian world. Immensely elaborate graves of citizens, kings, and queens. A culture surpassing even Egypt in its antiquity and importance. Thousands upon thousands of graves were uncovered at Ur, filled with a vast array of objects, revealing links all across the known world. One vast royal cemetery in particular, dated to around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, was the most spectacular ever found. Gold, lapis lazuli, cornelian, chlorite, bronze, silver, and other semi-precious stones flowed out along with expertly crafted items, musical instruments, and more. A world so much older than the Bible was unlocked. The apogee of the Sumerians. Woolley and those who followed him were able to construct an incredible account of ancient wealth and privilege. Like Queen Puabi, whose grave goods can still be seen today. And Ur wasn't alone. Just one of a glittering collection of metropolises. In the span of barely a millennium, the Sumerians had established mankind's first real urban centres. With towering walls and religious sanctuaries known as ziggurats, the skyscrapers of their day. Building arguably the world's most advanced civilization. In a landscape entirely devoid of natural resources, the Sumerians radically improved farming and irrigation techniques, resulting in larger surpluses of grain and an increase in the overall food supply. Ultimately allowing many within their society to put down their ploughs and pursue other endeavours, such as advanced mathematical and scientific knowledge. Perhaps the most famous of all Sumerian inventions, though, was the development of a complex system of writing. First used for bookkeeping, and then later on to record their own history. All All of these innovations helped to lay the foundation for some of the most powerful and wealthy city-states the world had ever seen, whose rulers presided over small but significant kingdoms. Within just a few centuries of Queen Puabi, however, by the 24th century BC, this prosperity was already coming to an end. From its very beginnings, civilization has been incredibly elitist. Far from everyone benefiting from the splendor of the first cities. In fact, most people didn't at all. And by around 2400 BC, the world of ancient Sumer came to a breaking point. Texts uncovered from Sumerian city-states, such as Lagash, indicate that there was a massive chasm between the wealthy, often hailing from the hereditary priestly class, and the impoverished common people. Most of the latter being so mired in debt they had to sell their own children into slavery in an effort to pay it off. Though not as well documented, it's believed that similar circumstances were prevalent in the other city-states too. Sometime between the years 2350 and 2340 BC, though scholars debate the exact date, a new type of ruler became king of the city-state of Umma. Lagash's great rival. The two had been fighting armed conflicts for centuries, with Lagash generally being the victor. Perhaps out of spite or the desire for revenge, this new ruler brutally attacked Lagash and is said to have massacred many of its people, as well as destroying its great temples. He then went on to conquer and annex other city-states, ultimately claiming to have forged an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Most scholars, though, don't take Lugal-Zagazi at his word. He really may only have controlled the city-states of Sumer, which in itself would have been a remarkable achievement. Had he done this, he would have created the first true world empire in history. But unfortunately for him, that honour would go to another. Not a Sumerian, but one whose origins lay further to the north. A land also remembered in the Bible.
God, man.
Akkad. Though his birth name is not known, he would later call himself Sharu Kin, meaning legitimate king. We know him by a different name, Sargon, the first great king of the Akkadian Empire. Generally regarded as history's first. Within just a few hundred years, the Sumerians would be forgotten, eclipsed by another power, revered by every state to arise in the region for 2,000 years to come. This is the history of that empire. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Hello, and welcome to History Time. As always, I'm your host, Pete Kelly. Currently in my underground secret laboratory working on new videos. The research for this one was undertaken by the great History with Cy. Go check out his channel for everything ancient history. Now, I'm still mostly a one-man team when it comes to making these things, and they take years to make. So I'm sure you won't mind me taking a moment to thank the sponsor of this one. It's Magellan TV, a long-time supporter of the channel. Like Netflix for scholars, Magellan TV has a library of thousands of documentaries to choose from. Space, geography, history, science, it's all here. Streamed seamlessly to any device you choose. When I'm stuck for new ideas, I often put something on from their playlists. From the Bronze Age to outer space, there's something here for everyone. One in particular that I recently enjoyed, and a playlist I often go back to, is Eternal Egypt, neighbours to the Akkadians. And there are plenty of other ancient history programmes to choose from too. And now I've teamed up with Magellan to offer you an exclusive free trial. Just click on the link in the description below. Thanks. Now, back to the ancient world. Every so often in history, an extremely capable and charismatic leader arises. And for better or worse, disrupts the world in which they live entirely, altering it forevermore. Whether Cyrus the Great of Persia in the 6th century BC, Alexander of the Greeks, or Julius Caesar 3 centuries later.
Pardon me.
The long span of antiquity has had its fair share of such figures. And more than 1,000 years before, in the 24th century BC, the very first arose. Sargon of Akkad would go on to become the most powerful ruler that had ever lived up until that time. In fact, nearly all of the future kings of ancient Mesopotamia, and even beyond, would try to imitate his style of rule, adopt his empire's efficient administrative system, and claim to be his worthy successor. Sargon was considered by those who came after to have been the model ruler and the epitome of all that a man could and should be. Like Charlemagne and King Arthur in centuries to come, he was the archetypal king who lived long and well. Yet, despite all of his great achievements and fame, very little is concretely known about his early life. Myth, history, and legend entwine. Given the immense chasm of time since he lived, the texts and inscriptions that archaeologists have uncovered about him are generally more legend than fact. The vast majority being Babylonian copies of originals, thought to have existed closer to Sargon's own day.
Sorry.
Sometimes called the First Histories, compiled during the age of Hammurabi, writer of the first law code during the Old Babylonian period. These clay tablets are copies of original royal inscriptions, supposedly found on monuments from 500 years before. though a tiny handful of original monuments survive too. Seized and taken to Elam by a victorious king during the 12th century BC, where French archaeologists found them. One of the more complete copies from Hammurabi's day, believed by many to have been commissioned by Sargon himself, outlines the future king's humble beginnings. He claims to be the son of a priestess. His father, he says, is unknown. Unable to care for him, his mother put him into a covered reed basket, sending it downriver, where it was later discovered by a water drawer named Aki, who raised the child as his own. It's a story that has parallels to the early biography of Moses, as told in the Hebrew Bible. Adding to the flood myth and the Garden of Eden, concepts which also have their roots with the Sumerians. Though not telling the story of his birth, another document known as the Sumerian King List, first compiled several centuries after Sargon's death, stresses his humble roots by claiming him to be the son of a gardener. Eventually, still early on in his career, we're told that Sargon became the cupbearer of a man named Ur-Zababa, ruler of the city-state of Kish, an important northern Sumerian city. Standing upriver from all the great strongholds of the south, and existing at a time of intense riverine management, at times in its history, Kish seems to have been able to control the flow of water to a certain extent, holding the lower cities to ransom. Of course, presumably unlike his leader, Ur-Zababa, Sargon was an Akkadian, speakers of an Eastern Semitic language, who occupied the regions just north of Sumer, known as Akkad. As far as the Akkadians themselves, however, not much is known about them before Sargon's reign. Most scholars believe they lived side by side with the Sumerians in many cities, being greatly influenced by their culture and religion. Today, Sumerian remains a culture and language with unknown roots, though it had fully developed by the 4th millennium BC, at vast centres like Uruk and Eridu. The very place, according to Sumerian mythology, where man was first chiselled out of the mud by the gods. The origins of the Akkadians, though, are to be found with the so-called second phase of urbanization occurring in the mid-3rd millennium BC in Syria and northern Mesopotamia, at massive cities like Ebla. And sometimes nomadic cultures like the Canaanites and the Amorites, living on the outer limits of the Sumerian world. By Sargon's day, though, the Akkadians seem to have shared the same gods as Sumer, living more or less the same way of life. Yet, given his linguistic roots, Sargon, or at least his ancestors, were outsiders. Whether he came from the mountains or the desert is unclear, but it is he who is given credit for the foundation of a new city, not far from Kish. He called it Agade. Agade's existence has never been in doubt, showing up in contemporary records throughout the 3rd millennium BC and onwards. However, that great city has never been found. We know roughly where it was, near Susa, at the southern edge of Sumer in the Mesopotamian lowland, a region with a lack of agricultural potential. But excellent access to the disparate peoples all around. Regions and cultures Sargon and his descendants would integrate into their own, expanding the horizons of Mesopotamia significantly. Without any archaeology to go on though, Sargon's city remains obscure. It may be that he really did create the city himself. He allegedly ruled for a ridiculously long time after all. Though some scholars now suggest his cult of personality to have become so strong that it could have caught some of the deeds of his successors in its orbit. As we know, it did those of his predecessors. For though Sargon's is often seen as a new dynasty, a break with the old, really he may have inherited concepts that came before, a continuation of the development of kingship. For this was the age of the Lugals, local headmen and warlords ruling through personal charisma and power rather than divine rule. Had it not been for the actions of one of those Sumerian kings, Sargon might never have amounted to anything at all. For just as he began his career at Kish, the king of Umma, Lugal-Zagazi, moved his capital to the great city of Uruk, taking along the way, ultimately expanding his rule over the whole of southern Mesopotamia. Sargon is often credited with many firsts in history. The first standing army, the first land empire. But really, Lugal-Zagazi may have been first. According to archaeological evidence and the archives of the various city-states, it was he who first ruled from the lower sea to the upper, holding sway over 50 governors and bringing an end to independent Samaria. And one of those cities he annexed was Kish. Given this burgeoning growth of militaristic Sumerian kingship by his day, it's no surprise really that Sargon had a go. He just had to cut off the head of the snake to make his play for power. A snake with many enemies. Though the details are murky, we're told that soon after Lugal-Zagazi seized Kish, Sargon, with a band of faithful followers, directly marched on Uruk.
Sargon, the king of Akkad, the bailiff of Ishtar, the king of the universe, the anointed one of An, the king of the land, the governor of Enlil. He vanquished Uruk in battle and smote 50 governors and the city by the mace of the god Ilaba. And he destroyed its fortress and captured Lugal-Zagazi, the king of Uruk, in battle. He led him to the gate of Enlil in a neck-stock.
Taking Lugal-Zagazi to the gate of Enlil, the holy city of Nippur, was a powerful symbolic gesture. The old king's power was clearly broken, and Sargon favoured by the gods. The old king's ultimate fate? We're not told. Unlike his early days, Sargon's reign as king, as well as the actions of his new government, are relatively well documented, much more so than most at the time. And though the records make it seem as if Sargon had an easy time conquering so many territories, holding on to them, especially the proud cities of Sumer, proved to be a challenge. Most of the city-states he claims to have controlled eventually rose up in rebellion against him. though he and his men, the beginnings of a professional army personally loyal to him, were able to put down every revolt using a combination of fear, brute force, and at times, diplomacy.
What?
Within a number of decades, Sargon was able to establish himself as the undisputed ruler of both Sumer and Akkad, as well as reorganizing and reforming many aspects of the societies he ruled.
Sargon, king of Akkad, vanquished Ur in battle and smote the city and destroyed its fortress. He smote its territory and Lagash as far as the sea. He vanquished Umma in battle and destroyed its fortress.
By around 2334 BC, with the completion of Sargon's conquest, the era that scholars call the early dynastic period of Sumer comes to an end, and the Akkadian period begins. So famed was Sargon that in the 2 millennia to come, Babylonian kings used the title King of Akkad all the way down to the Persian period, the Akkadian king becoming the very embodiment of empire and kingship, what it meant to be a ruler. Lugal Zagazi was forgotten. When European archaeologists first began excavating in Mesopotamia in the early 19th century, seeking to understand the origins of their own civilization, next to nothing was known of the ancient history of that land, besides the biblical stories. Its mud brick cities having died millennia before. One by one, as the years went by, the great mounds began to be investigated.
Come on, baby, come on.
The cities of the Bible unearthed.
I think I shot too early there.
Foremost amongst these early discoveries was the Assyrian capital at Nineveh, made famous by the early Assyriologist Austin Henry Layard. Work went on for decades, brick by brick, uncovering a vast metropolis of the Iron Age, and great amounts of information on the Assyrian era of the first millennium BC. Yet, underneath that city lay far older foundations. In 1931, the latest in a long line of astonishing discoveries was made. For 1,500 years before the Assyrians, the place had originally been built by Akkadian workmen. It was in the Akkadian layers of the city that a number of artifacts were discovered. Chief amongst them, a great bronze head, thought to be part of an impressive statue of an Akkadian king. Though defaced at some point in history, today the head is rightly considered one of the great masterpieces of ancient art, providing a rare glimpse into the art style of the Akkadian world. Generally thought to represent either Sargon or his grandson Naram-Sin, in reality, almost nothing is known about the head, though it is reminiscent of similar heads from Gudea in the years following Akkadian rule. This was an age when realistic representations of humans were almost entirely unknown, making the head entirely unprecedented. This bronze artifact, precisely and expertly crafted, wasn't just a statement of the king's power, but a perpetual embodiment of his very being. More than a representation, for those who looked upon it, this statue would channel the very presence of the king himself, working as a substitute in his absence.
Come on,
The fact
man.
that the head was possibly still on display and defaced many centuries later during the sack of Nineveh in the 7th century BC suggests that his power lived on for more than 1,000 years after his death. Notably, the figure is very different from the usual depictions of Sumerian rulers. Generally bald with smiling, benevolent features. This statue has elaborate hair. Whether it was a wig or a new Akkadian hairstyle is unclear, but it wasn't just fashion that changed under Sargon. What he attempted in Sumer was revolutionary. For over a millennium, the ruling establishment had long consisted of priesthood and nobility, working hand in hand to control nearly every aspect of Sumerian society, especially in the cities. Often with single hereditary families controlling all aspects of temple life in their respective strongholds. When Sargon arrived, however, he broke the power of the priesthood and the noble families, replacing them with hand-picked Akkadian governors, fiercely loyal to him and him alone. The Akkadians who now controlled these estates were able to keep the vast majority of the crops and revenue for themselves, a sizable share of the new empire's wealth. Such a system also helped to ensure their loyalty to the new regime, obliging them to serve it because it now gave them a huge stake in the state's success. They'd bought in to the new system.
I didn't have to reload. Why did I reload?
This transfer
should really have
of
learned
such
from that.
productive
That was really
lands
dumb.
also greatly diminished, if not outright destroyed, the power and influence of the former religious and ruling establishment. Because up until then, such property had been their main source of income. While in most cases the Akkadian government compensated the previous owners, the estates were still forcibly taken. If there was resistance to the offer, then it's safe to say there would have been serious consequences for those refusing to make the sale. In addition to the temple estates, those loyal to Sargon were also put directly in charge of managing the main temples and religious endowments that were found in most large cities. In one instance, Sargon put his daughter, who later went by the name Enheduanna, in charge of the great temple complex of the moon god Nanna in the city of Ur,
What the fuck?
thus allowing her to directly oversee that institution's wealthy endowment and associating the new kingship with divine support. After consolidating his hold on Sumer, Sargon looked beyond his borders. Claiming to have conquered lands stretching from the western areas of Elam in what's today's southwestern Iran to the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. Bringing immensely wealthy trade routes under his direct control and providing access to others yet further away. These were diverse, far-flung lands, inhabited by people speaking many different languages and worshipping different gods. For the first time, brought under the sway of a single government. Though most of the places Sargon attacked outside of Sumer can't tell their own stories, one place can. Discovered in the 1960s by Italian archaeologists, the city of Ebla had one of the largest cuneiform archives ever found, and a destruction level in the archaeological record to match Akkadian claims. Sargon may even show up briefly in the Ebla records just before the sack of the city, as the King of Kish, or father of the King of Kish, he having put his son to rule there perhaps. Once one of the great cities of the early Bronze Age, instrumental in the urbanization of Syria during the 3rd millennium BC, Ebla now became an Akkadian provincial city. With its millennia-old cities, religious institutions, and complex irrigation networks, Samaria had arguably been the center of civilization for centuries.